An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She fainted at the mansion's door. When she opened her eyes, the millionaire whispered, "I've been waiting for you today." But what she would discover inside could destroy everything she thought she knew about her own family. Watch this story until the end, you'll be surprised. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment, we post videos like this every day. Continuing. The rain fell on Benedictine Farm like tears from a sky that no longer knew how to cry. Lena Sanders felt her legs weaken when the iron gate closed behind her with a crash that echoed through the empty property. Her dark hair stuck to her wet face, and she knew there was no turning back. 3 months of planning, sleepless nights studying every detail of that family, every clue that had brought her here, and now she stood before the grand house that had haunted her nightmares since childhood. The colonial mansion rose imposingly at the top of the hill, its windows like empty eyes observing the valley that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was December, but the wind coming from the Blue Ridge Mountains brought a cold that didn't match the Virginia summer. Lena felt her body tremble. She didn't know if it was from the cold, from fear, or from the certainty that her life would change forever in that moment. She had rehearsed this moment so many times, had planned every word, every gesture, every breath. But when her eyes met the male silhouette emerging from the porch, all her planning dissolved like smoke. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She should be strong, determined, ready to confront Benjamin Walker with the truth about her mother. Instead, she felt the world spin and her legs give way. The last thing she saw before fainting were those eyes, dark as a moonless night, but shining with an intensity that pierced her like a blade. And then, nothing. When she awoke, she was in his arms, strong, determined, carrying her across the porch of the house as if she weighed nothing. His scent invaded her senses, cedarwood, coffee, and something indefinable that made her stomach tighten. She tried to speak, to protest, to say she could walk on her own, but he silenced her with a look. "I've been waiting for you today," he whispered, and his deep voice resonated through the chest where she was resting. Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. How could he have been expecting her? How did he know she would come? And why did that familiar voice make her remember lullabies her mother sang when she was little? Benjamin carried her into the house, passing through corridors filled with portraits of ancestors who seemed to judge her with their severe gazes. The walls, covered with antique tiles, told stories of a time when Benedictine Farm was one of the largest tobacco producers in southern Virginia, when the Walker family had lands that stretched across 3 counties and political influence that reached all the way to Washington. He carefully placed her on a leather sofa in the library, and it was only then that Lena could see him properly. Benjamin Walker was exactly as she had imagined, and completely different from what she expected. Tall, with broad shoulders that showed years of work in the fields, dark hair already touched by the frost of his early 40s, and a small scar on his left eyebrow that gave a dangerous air to his aristocratic features. But it was his eyes that disturbed her, eyes that seemed to have known her forever. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to sound firm, but her voice came out weak and trembling. "You know who I am," he replied, pouring himself a glass of bourbon from a silver tray that sat on a cherry-wood table. "The question is, who are you really? Because from what I see, you're not just another journalist after a story about the cursed Walker family." Lena felt her blood freeze. How did he know about the disguise she had used to get information in town? For weeks she had presented herself as a freelance journalist, interested in the history of the tobacco farms in the region. She had even falsified credentials and created a blog to give credibility to the lie. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, but he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lena Sanders, 32 years old, historical document restorer at the University of Virginia. Orphaned since the age of 12, father unknown. He spoke slowly, savoring each word like someone tasting an expensive wine. Daughter of Emma Sanders, who worked on this farm 20 years ago as a private tutor. Lena's world collapsed. All her research, all the months of careful investigation, and he already knew everything from the beginning. Worse, he knew about her mother, about Emma, who had died in a car accident when Lena was just a girl, taking with her all the secrets about the father Lena had never known. "You knew my mother," she said, and it wasn't a question. Benjamin downed his glass of bourbon in one gulp and fixed his eyes on her. For a moment, Lena saw something that could be pain cross that impenetrable gaze. "I did," he answered, and his voice carried a weight that made Lena understand there was much more history there than she had imagined. "She worked here. She did. She taught your sisters. She did." Lena stood up from the sofa, feeling a deaf anger rise in her chest. "Stop that. Stop answering with monosyllables as if I were a child. I didn't come here to play guessing games. I came looking for the truth about my mother, about why she suddenly left this place and never spoke about it again, about why she had nightmares and woke up screaming the name Benjamin in the middle of the night." The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the library like a gunshot, and for a few seconds, they just stared at each other in silence. Lena could hear her own heart beating, could feel the tension in the air as if it were something tangible. "Your mother," he finally said, and his voice was different, hoarser, more vulnerable, "should not have died that way." "What do you mean?" "Emma was special, different from any woman I had ever met. Intelligent, determined, too brave for her own good." He began to pace the library, running his hand over the old books as if seeking support in the worn spines. "When she arrived here to teach my sisters, I was a 25-year-old man who thought he knew everything about life. She was only 20, but she taught me that I knew nothing." Lena felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't just curiosity, it was recognition. The way he spoke about Emma was the same way she herself remembered her mother, a woman who illuminated any room she entered, who had answers to questions nobody asked, who saw beauty where others only saw problems. "You two got involved," she said, and it wasn't a question. "We did," he confirmed, stopping in front of a bookshelf and pulling out a book, 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez. This was her favorite book. She said our family was like the Buendias, condemned to repeat the same mistakes through generations. "What mistakes?" Benjamin opened the book, and a yellowed photograph fell out. Lena approached and saw an image. That made her heart race. Her mother, young and radiant, wearing a white cotton dress, sitting under a plum tree in the farm's yard. But she wasn't alone. A man was behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his face partially hidden by the tree's shadow. "It's you," whispered Lena. "It's us," he corrected. Two young people who believed that love could overcome any obstacle. That class difference, family pressure, secrets of the past, would be no match for what we felt for each other. Lena picked up the photograph with trembling hands. Her mother looked so happy, so alive, so different from the melancholic woman haunted by nightmares that she had known. And the man behind her, even with his face partially hidden, she could see the intensity in his gaze, the possessive way he held Emma's shoulders. What happened? Why did she leave? Benjamin's face closed like a door slamming shut. "Your mother discovered something she shouldn't have discovered. Something about my family, about this house, about deaths that were never properly investigated." "What kind of deaths?" "The kind that makes young women disappear in the middle of the night without leaving a trace. The kind that makes police file cases without asking questions. The kind that keeps a powerful family above any suspicion." Lena felt a chill down her spine. "Are you saying that your family—" "I'm saying that Emma was too intelligent and too curious for her own good. And when she started asking questions about my Aunt Isabel's death, about the disappearance of my cousin's fiancé, about the accidents that happened whenever someone threatened to reveal family secrets—" He stopped, as if the words were too heavy to continue. "They threatened her. Worse." Benjamin turned to face her, and Lena saw in his eyes a pain so deep that she felt the urge to touch him, to console him. "They threatened you." The world stopped. Lena felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. "Me? But I was just a child." A child who existed because Emma had gotten involved with a walker, A child who, if she grew up, might ask the same questions her mother did. A child who represented a dangerous connection between Emma and this family. He moved closer to her, and Lena could feel the heat emanating from his body. So, Emma did the only thing she could do. She took you and disappeared in the middle of the night, taking with her any evidence of what she had discovered. But she died 2 years later. Did she? Benjamin laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Emma Sanders died in a car accident on a deserted road, on a night without rain, driving a car that had been serviced the week before. What kind of accident do you think that was? Lena collapsed back onto the sofa, her legs no longer able to support her. Everything she had believed about her mother's life, about her mother's death, about her own origin, was crumbling like a house of cards. Why are you telling me this? Why did you receive me here if you know it's dangerous? Benjamin knelt before her, so close that Lena could count the lines around his eyes, could smell the bourbon on his breath. Because 20 years ago, I let the woman I loved run away too. Protect her daughter, I let her go believing that I had chosen my family over her, and she died thinking I was a coward. His voice was hoarse, carrying an emotion that made Lena want to cry. Now you're here, with the same eyes as hers, asking the same questions she asked, running the same risk she ran. And this time I won't let you run away. The way he spoke made something inside Lena ignite. It wasn't just attraction, although his proximity was doing strange things to her body. It was recognition, as if a part of her that had been dormant for years had finally awakened. You don't know me, she whispered. I do, he replied, raising his hand to touch her face. Lena should have pulled away, should have protested, but when his fingers touched her skin, she felt an electric current run through her entire body. I've known you since before you were born. I know you through every story your mother told me about the daughter she was carrying. I know you through every night I spent awake wondering what your life would be like, if you would be like her, if one day you would have the courage to come looking for the truth. And now I'm here. And now you're here. He leaned in closer, and Lena could feel his breath against her lips. The question is, are you prepared to discover the whole truth, or will you run away like your mother did? Lena felt anger and desire mix in her chest in an explosive combination. I don't run from anything. Prove it. It was a challenge, and they both knew it. Lena could have stood up, walked to the door, returned to Charlottesville, and forgotten everything about Benedictine Farm and Benjamin Walker. She could have maintained the safe and predictable life she had built, the life of an independent woman who didn't need anyone. Instead, she held his face with both hands and kissed him. It wasn't a gentle or hesitant kiss. It was pure hunger. 20 years of unanswered questions, a lifetime of loneliness seeking a connection she didn't even know she was looking for. Benjamin reacted as if he had been struck by lightning, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss, until Lena lost any notion of where she ended and where he began. When they separated, they were breathless, and Lena could feel his heart beating against his chest. That was a mistake, she said, but made no move to pull away. It was, he agreed, kissing her neck at a spot that made Lena moan softly. The kind of mistake that could get us killed. Then why don't we stop? Because some mistakes are worth dying for. Lena knew she should be rational, should think about the consequences, should remember that this man had just admitted that his family was dangerous, possibly murderous. But when he looked at her that way, as if she were the only real thing in a world of shadows, all rationality disappeared. Show me the house, she said. Lena, show me where my mother lived, where she slept, where she taught, where she discovered the secrets that made her run away. Benjamin hesitated for a moment, and Lena saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of her, but fear for what she might discover. Are you sure? I am. He stood up and extended his hand to her. When Lena took it, she felt again that electric current, that sensation that her destiny was being sealed. Then come, he said. But remember, once you know the truth, there's no going back. They left the library and climbed the dark wooden staircase that led to the second floor. The steps creaked beneath their feet, and Lena had the strange sensation that she was climbing toward her own destiny. The walls were covered with family portraits, men and women with severe looks who seemed to judge anyone who dared pass by. "Are these your sisters?" asked Lena, pointing to a photograph of two delicate blonde girls. "They were," replied Benjamin, and something in his voice made Lena stop walking. "What do you mean, were?" "Catherine died at 15, drowning in the property's pond. Isabella disappeared 10 years ago. Went out riding one morning and never returned." Lena felt a chill. "You said they were my mother's students." "They were. Emma adored the girls, and they adored her too. Catherine especially. She said she wanted to be a teacher like Emma when she grew up." Benjamin stopped in front of carved double wooden doors. This was her room. He opened the door, and Lena entered a space that seemed frozen in time. The bed was made with a white crocheted coverlet. There were dried flowers in a vase on the dressing. Table and cotton curtains fluttered with the breeze coming through the partially open window. "No one has touched anything here since she left," said Benjamin, watching Lena explore the room. "Why?" "Because it was the only place in the house where I could still smell her scent." Lena turned to face him and saw a vulnerability in his eyes that touched her deeply. There stood a man who had lost the only woman he had ever loved and spent 20 years living with that void. "You really did love her," she whispered. "I did. I do." He moved closer to her. "And I know I should feel remorse for that, should feel guilty for being here with you, but when I see you in this room, it's as if Emma had come home. I'm not my mother. No, you're stronger than she was, more determined. Emma ran when she discovered the truth. You came looking for it." Lena approached the dressing table and saw something that made her heart race. A silver-handled hairbrush with some strands still tangled in the bristles, dark strands like hers. She left this behind? She left many things behind. Benjamin opened the dressing table drawer and took out a small leather-bound diary, including this. Lena took the diary with trembling hands. The handwriting on the cover was unmistakably her mother's. Emma Sanders, 1997, the year she was born. "You can read it," said Benjamin, "but be prepared. There are things in there that will change how you see everything." Lena opened the diary to a random page and began to read. "March 15th, Benjamin came to my room again last night. I know it's wrong. I know I could lose my job, but when he touches me, it's as if the whole world makes sense, as if I've finally found my place. He says he loves me, that he wants to marry me when he finishes college. I want to believe, but there's something about this house, something that makes me uneasy. The girls say strange things about Aunt Isabel. They say she still walks the corridors at night. They say you can hear her crying in the attic." Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. She closed the diary and looked at Benjamin. "Who was Aunt Isabel?" "My father's sister. Died 30 years ago, when I was a child." "How did she die?" "Officially, suicide. Jumped from the house tower in the middle of the night." "And unofficially?" Benjamin walked to the window and looked out, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Unofficially, she discovered that my father was killing his wives when they became inconvenient." Lena's blood froze. "Killing his wives? My grandfather did it. My great-grandfather did it. It's a family tradition that goes back generations. Marry young, beautiful women, use them to produce children and maintain social appearances, and then eliminate them when they know too much or when they tire of the life they lead." Lena sat heavily on the bed, feeling as if the world were spinning. "And you, did you also—" "Me. I broke the cycle." Benjamin turned to face her, and his eyes were shining with a dangerous intensity. "I fell in love for real, and when you fall in love for real, you can't hurt the person you love. You protect them, even if it means letting them go." But she died anyway. She died because my father discovered where she was, because he couldn't leave the past alone. His voice was laden with pain and anger. "And now you're here, making the same mistake she made." "What mistake?" "Trusting me." They stared at each other in silence for a long moment. The tension in the air was palpable. an explosive mixture of desire, fear, and a connection that neither could explain. Lena knew she should be afraid. She knew that any sensible person would run from that house and never look back. But when she looked at Benjamin, when she saw the pain in his eyes, when she felt the intensity of the attraction between them, she couldn't think rationally. "Where is your father now?" she asked. "Dead, 5 years ago. Cancer. And the rest of the family?" "Scattered. Only I remain. Me and the ghosts." Lena rose from the bed and approached him. Benjamin stood motionless, as if any movement might break the spell that enveloped them. "If you wanted to hurt me," she said, putting her hand on his chest, "you would have done it already. Lantasu, if you were like your father, like your grandfather, I would already be dead. You don't understand, there are things in this family, curses, traditions, things that go beyond my will to protect you." "Then tell me everything. Show me everything. Let me decide if it's worth taking the risk." Benjamin held her face with both hands, and Lena saw a war happening in his eyes. "If I do that, if I tell you everything, you may not be able to forgive me. And if you don't, I'll never be able to trust you." He kissed her then, a desperate kiss, laden with 20 years of loneliness and regret. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. "Then so be it," he whispered, "but remember, I warned you." And as the sun disappeared completely behind the mountains, leaving Benedictine Farm shrouded in shadows, Lena knew her life would never be the same. She had crossed a line from which there would be no return, and now all that remained was to discover if on the other side she would find the truth she was looking for, or the death her mother had tried to avoid. Lena woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging footsteps, as if someone were walking with difficulty. She opened her eyes in the darkness of the room that had been her mother's and felt her heart race. What time was it? The last thing she remembered was falling asleep reading Emma's diary, with Benjamin sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching her in silence. Now she was alone. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Lena held her breath, every muscle tense, waiting for the doorknob to turn. But nothing happened. Just silence, a heavy silence, laden with expectation. She got up slowly from the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The cotton nightgown that Benjamin had found in the wardrobe, probably belonging to one of the dead sisters, brushed against her legs as she approached the door. She put her ear to the wood and listened. Nothing. She turned the knob carefully and opened the door slightly. The corridor was empty, illuminated only by the moonlight entering through the tall windows. But there was something different in the air. A sweet, nauseating smell, like wilted flowers left too long in water. That's when she saw it. At the end of the corridor, near the staircase that led to the attic, a female figure was walking slowly. She wore a white nightgown that rippled as if moved by a non-existent breeze, and her long hair covered her face. The figure made no sound, gliding down the corridor like a mirage. Lena wanted to scream, wanted to run back to the room and lock the door, but a strange force prevented her from moving. The figure stopped in front of the attic door and turned slowly. The face was of a disturbing beauty, skin as white as porcelain, lips red as blood, large dark eyes that seemed like bottomless wells. But there was something wrong with those eyes. They were empty, lifeless, like those of a doll. The figure extended a hand toward Lena, and her lips moved, forming a silent word that echoed directly in Lena's mind. "Run." Lena blinked, and the apparition disappeared. "Saw her too?" Lena turned quickly, her heart almost leaping from her chest. Benjamin was standing behind her, wearing only pajama pants, his bare torso revealing muscles defined by field work and some scars that seemed to tell stories she didn't yet know. "Who was that?" asked Lena, her voice trembling. "Isabel," he replied, moving closer. "My aunt. She appears every night around this time, walking toward the attic where she died. You talk about it as if it were normal. For someone who grew up in this house, it is normal." Benjamin touched her shoulder, and Lena felt the heat of his skin penetrate the thin fabric of the nightgown. "Isabel isn't the only one. There are many women who died here, many who can't rest." Lena moved away from him, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. You believe in ghosts? I believe what I see, and what I feel. He followed her, cornering her against the corridor wall. Just as I believe what I'm feeling now, looking at you in that nightgown. His tone of voice changed, becoming deeper, more laden with desire. Lena felt her body respond immediately, a wave of heat spreading across her skin. But there was more than desire in his eyes. There was a primitive, almost savage hunger that frightened and excited her at the same time. Benjamin, you look so much like her in that outfit, he whispered, raising his hand to touch her face. Emma used to wear a nightgown just like it. I would watch her in the corridors, dreaming of the day I could touch her without having to hide. And now you can touch me, said Lena, surprising herself with her own courage. Can I? His question came laden with a vulnerability that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. Even knowing what you know about my family, even knowing that women die when they get involved with Walker men? Maybe I'm different from the others. That's exactly what Emma said. His words were like a bucket of cold water. Lena felt reality return with full force. She was in a house where women died, getting involved with a man whose family had a history of murders, repeating exactly the steps that had led her mother to death. But when Benjamin tilted his head and kissed her neck, all rationality disappeared again. His lips against her skin were liquid fire, awakening sensations she didn't even know she possessed. His large, calloused hand slid down her waist, pulling her closer, and Lena could feel the proof of his desire pressing against her body. We shouldn't, she murmured, but her own hands were already exploring his bare chest, tracing the scars, and delighting in the way his muscles contracted under her touch. No, he agreed, gently nibbling her earlobe. But I'm going to do it anyway, unless you ask me to stop. Lena knew she should ask. She knew the intelligent thing to do would be to return to the room, pack her bags, and leave on the first bus in the morning. But when he pressed her against the wall and she felt the full length of his masculine body against hers, the only thing she could do was moan softly. I'm not going to ask you to stop, she whispered. The smile he gave was dangerous and promising. Then come with me. He picked her up as if she weighed nothing, and Lena let herself be carried, wrapping her legs around his waist. Benjamin carried her down the corridor, past the closed doors of empty rooms, past the portraits of dead ancestors, past shadows that seemed to move at the edges of vision. His room was at the end of the corridor, a spacious suite dominated by a solid wood bed that seemed to have been made to last centuries. The walls were covered with shelves filled with old books, and an extinguished fireplace occupied one of the side walls. Tall windows gave a view of the farm's dark fields, where the full moon transformed everything into silver tones. Benjamin carefully placed her on the bed, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Lena could see the war happening in his eyes, desire fighting against guilt, passion against responsibility. Last warning, he said, his voice hoarse. If we go down this path, there's no turning back. You will be mine and I will be yours, and everything that comes with it. The dangers, the secrets, the curse of this family, all that will be yours too. And if I want that, then you're braver or crazier than I thought. Lena rose on the bed and held his face with both hands. I'm both. She kissed him then, a deep and desperate kiss that contained 20 years of loneliness, a lifetime of unanswered questions, and a hunger that she didn't even know she possessed. Benjamin reacted as if he had been freed from a prison, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. His hands slid down her back, finding the small buttons of the nightgown and undoing them one by one with a patience that contrasted with the urgency of his kisses. When the fabric slid from her shoulders, leaving her naked from the waist up, he stopped to admire her. You're even more beautiful than I imagined, he whispered, tracing the line of her collarbone. With his fingers, Lena felt a wave of heat and shyness. She had had relationships before, but never anything that compared to the intensity of what she was feeling now. It was as if every cell in her body were alive, vibrating with an energy she had never experienced. Your turn, she said, pulling at the waistband of his pajama pants. Benjamin rid himself of his remaining clothing, and Lena could see him completely for the first time. He was a handsome man, she had noticed from the beginning, but naked, he was devastating. Tall, strong, each muscle defined by hard work, his tanned skin contrasting with the scars that marked his chest and arms like a map of battles won. "Where did these come from?" she asked, touching a long scar that ran from his shoulder to his elbow. "My father," he replied simply. "He didn't approve of my relationship with your mother, thought a physical lesson would change my mind." Lena felt anger course through her body like liquid fire. "He hurt you because of my mother. He hurt me because I chose love instead of fear, because I refused to follow the family tradition of using women and discarding them." Benjamin held. Her face and his eyes were shining with a fierce intensity. "And I would do it all again for her, for you." There were no more words after that, only bodies meeting, hands exploring, mouths devouring with a hunger of 20 years. Benjamin laid her on the bed and worshipped her with a reverence that made her feel like a goddess. Each kiss, each caress, each whisper against her skin was a promise, a declaration, a mark of possession that she gladly accepted. When they finally united, it was with an intensity that left them both trembling. Lena felt as if she were being consumed and reborn at the same time, as if each movement of his were rewriting her soul. Benjamin murmured words in English and Spanish against her skin, a mixture of adoration and possession that made her gasp with pleasure. They loved each other with a desperate urgency, as if they knew that night could be their last. And perhaps they did know. Deep in Lena's mind, a small frightened voice whispered that she was making the same mistake as her mother, that she was falling in love with a man who could destroy her. But when he made her explode in waves of pleasure that left her blind and deaf to the world, when he shouted her name like a prayer, as he found his own release, all the voices of caution fell silent. They fell asleep, intertwined, sweaty and satisfied, but it was a restless sleep. Lena dreamed of women in white nightgowns walking the corridors, dreamed of her mother young and in love, dreamed of a baby crying somewhere in the house. She woke with the first ray of sunlight entering through the window and found Benjamin, already dressed, standing by the fireplace, handling some papers. "Sleep well?" he asked, but there was something different in his voice, a distance that hadn't existed the night before. "What's going on?" Lena sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her body. "I need to show you something," he said, turning to face her. His eyes were somber, laden with a pain that made Lena's stomach tighten. "Something I found last night after you fell asleep." He approached the bed and extended a yellowed envelope. The name Emma Sanders was written on the front, in handwriting Lena didn't recognize. "Where did you find this?" "In your mother's diary. It was glued to the back cover, hidden." Benjamin sat on the edge of the bed but kept his distance. "Read it." Lena opened the envelope with trembling hands and removed a sheet of paper also yellowed by time. The letter was dated October 15th, 1997, 2 months before her mother left the farm. "My dear Emma," the letter began, and the handwriting was clearly masculine. "I know that what I'm about to tell you could destroy everything between us, but I can no longer live with this secret. I can't let you marry me without knowing the whole truth about who I really am." Lena felt a chill down her spine and continued, reading. "You asked about the deaths in my family, about why so many Walker women die young and in strange circumstances. The truth is they are not accidents or suicides. They are sacrifices. Rituals that my family has practiced for generations to maintain our wealth and power." Lena's hands began to tremble. She looked at Benjamin, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Continue reading," he said. "The Walker curse is not just a legend. It's real. My great-great-grandfather made a pact with forces he should not have invoked. In exchange for wealth and influence, he promised that each generation would sacrifice a young woman on the altar of greed. My grandfather killed 3 wives. My father killed 5, and now it's my turn." Lena dropped the letter as if it were on fire. "This can't be true." "Continue," insisted Benjamin, and there was something in his voice that made her pick up the letter again. "I've fought against this my whole life, Emma. I swore I would be different, that I would break the cycle. But last night, They came to me, the spirits of the dead ancestors. They said that if I don't fulfill my part of the agreement, the entire family will be destroyed. The farm will be lost, the lands will become barren, and everything we've built over centuries will be reduced to ashes. Tears began to well in Lena's eyes. The letter continued with horrible details about the ritual, about how it should be, performed, about when and where. But there is a way to escape, the letter said. If the woman marked for sacrifice disappears before the full moon, if she runs far away and never returns, the pact can be postponed for a generation. It's a risk. It could mean death for me, but it's a risk I'm willing to take for you. The letter ended with a desperate declaration of love and a plea for Emma to run and never return. It was signed, "With all my love and regret, Benjamin." Lena let the letter fall in her lap and looked at the man with whom she had spent the night. "You wrote this?" "I did. 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And my mother ran because of this. She ran, but she didn't go far enough. She didn't hide well enough." His voice was laden with pain and guilt. "My father found her 2 years later, and fulfilled what I didn't have the courage to do." Lena rose from the bed abruptly, wrapping the sheet around her body. She felt as if the world was spinning, as if everything she had believed about her life were a lie. "You're telling me that my mother was murdered in a black magic ritual. I'm telling you that she died because she got involved with a cursed man, because she fell in love with someone who should have protected her and couldn't. And now I'm doing the same thing." Benjamin stood up and tried to approach, but she backed away. "Lena, please." "No!" Her voice echoed through the room. "Don't come near me. You knew from the moment you saw me at the door that I would be next. That's why you said you were expecting me. That's why you weren't surprised by my arrival." "It's not like that. Then explain to me how it is." She was shouting now, all the pain and confusion of the last few days exploding in an uncontrollable fury. "Explain to me how a man can lie with a woman knowing she is marked to die. Explain to me how you can touch me, knowing your hands might be the last ones I'll feel." Benjamin stopped trying to approach, but his eyes were shining with an intensity that frightened her. "You want to know the truth, the whole truth?" His voice was dangerously low. "The truth is that when I saw you fainted at the door, my first thought wasn't, how will I protect her? It was, finally my time has come. The truth is that I spent 20 years dreaming of you, imagining what it would be like when you grew up, waiting for the day you would come looking for me." Lena felt as if she had been slapped. "The truth is that the curse doesn't choose random women. It chooses the woman the Walker man loves most, the woman he desires more than his own life, the woman who represents his greatest weakness." He began to approach again, and this time she didn't back away. "And from the moment you were born, from the moment your mother told me she was pregnant, I knew you would be my downfall." "Then, why did you bring me here? Why didn't you let me go?" "Because I'm a cursed and selfish man who preferred to have you for a few days than never have you at all." He was just inches from her now, and Lena could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Because 20 years of loneliness and regret drove me insane. Because when I saw you at that gate, looking too much like your mother, too desirable for my own good, I decided that if I was to be cursed, at least I would be cursed with you." Lena felt tears streaming down her face. "You brought me here to kill me. I brought you here to love you and to protect you." "How can you protect me from a curse?" "By running." The answer came without hesitation. "Today. Now. We'll do as your mother did. You will disappear. Go far away, change your name, live a new life where the Walkers can never find you." "And you?" Benjamin smiled, but it was a sad and resigned smile. "I will pay the price my father paid for letting Emma escape. The curse will claim its pound of flesh one way or another. What price? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you will be alive." Lena studied his face, looking for signs of lying, manipulation, anything that would help her understand if she could trust him. But all she saw was a man destroyed by the weight of a heritage he never chose, a man willing to sacrifice himself to protect the woman he loved. "And if I don't want to run?" Then you're braver or crazier than I thought. I already told you I'm both. She moved closer to him, placing her hands on his bare chest. And what if there's a third option? What if there's a way to break the curse instead of just postponing? Dois Lena. My mother ran and died anyway. How many other women ran and were found? How many generations of Walker men sacrificed themselves believing they were saving their loved ones? She held his face, forcing him to look her in the eyes. What if it's time to fight instead of run? You don't understand the power we're dealing with. Then teach me. Show me everything, the rituals, the altars, the secrets your family has kept for generations. Her voice was firm now, laden with a determination that surprised them both. If I'm going to die, at least I'll die fighting. And if I'm going to live, I'll live free of this curse. Benjamin studied her for a long moment, and Lena saw something change in his eyes. Resignation was giving way to something dangerous, hope. It would mean going where no Walker has gone in 100 years, he said. It would mean facing not just the dead, but the living who benefit from this curse. What living? The family may be scattered, but it's not dead. There are cousins, uncles, descendants who know the secret and who won't allow it to be revealed, who will kill to keep it safe. Then we'll have to kill them first. The coldness with which she said this surprised them. Lena Sanders, the document restorer who lived a quiet life in Charlottesville, had disappeared. In her place was a woman willing to do anything to protect what was hers. Are you sure? Asked Benjamin. I am. She leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that sealed a pact more dangerous than any black magic. Now show me where it all began. They dressed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Lena chose practical clothes, jeans, boots, a cotton shirt that allowed freedom of movement. Benjamin wore dark clothes and grabbed a flashlight and some tools from a drawer. Will we need this? Asked Lena, pointing to a shotgun he had also taken. I hope not, but it's better to be prepared. They left the house through the back door, crossing the yard where the plum tree from the photograph still grew, majestic and laden with fruit. The sun was already high, but a strange mist hung over the property, giving a supernatural air to the landscape. Where are we going? Asked Lena. To the chapel. That's where it all began, and that's where it must end. The chapel was about 500 yards from the main house, hidden by a small grove of oak trees. It was an old construction of stone and wood that clearly hadn't received maintenance for decades. The windows were broken, the roof partially collapsed, and vines covered the walls like skeletal fingers. My family built this in 1897, explained Benjamin as they approached. Officially, it was a Catholic chapel for the farm workers. Unofficially, it was something else. He pushed the heavy wooden door, which creaked like a cry of agony. The interior of the chapel was plunged into near-absolute darkness, broken only by beams of light entering through the broken windows. The smell was of mold, old incense, and something else, something sweet and nauseating that made Lena cover her nose. Jesus Christ, she muttered, and immediately regretted her choice of words. The altar was still there, but it wasn't a Christian altar. It was a table of black stone, covered with engraved symbols that seemed to pulse in the darkness. Around the table, concentric circles had been carved into the stone floor, filled with what appeared to be copper or oxidized bronze. But what really made Lena recoil were the bones. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, were stacked on the walls like a macabre decoration. Skulls, ribs, femurs, all obviously human, all obviously very old. How many? She asked, her voice just a whisper. I don't know for certain. The ritual began more than 100 years ago. Benjamin lit the flashlight, and the light revealed more horrible details. One woman per generation, sometimes two if the man remarried. And the bones stay here. To feed the curse, to keep it strong. Lena approached the altar, despite all her instincts screaming for her to run. The symbols engraved in the stone seemed to move in the flashlight's beam, forming patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. How does the ritual work? The woman is brought here on the full moon. She is prepared. And then Benjamin couldn't finish, and then she's killed on this altar. Yes, And you would do this to me? Benjamin dropped the flashlight, which rolled across the floor, producing dancing shadows. Never. I'd rather die. Then we'll have to find another way. Lena began to examine the symbols more closely, using her experience as a document restorer to try to decipher the patterns. There were elements she recognized, some alchemical symbols, Nordic runes, hieroglyphs that could be Egyptian or something older. Was your great-great-grandfather a scholar of the occult? Obsessive. Spent years collecting forbidden knowledge, gathering fragments of rituals from different cultures. Benjamin approached but kept his distance from the altar. They say he managed to contact something very ancient, very powerful, and very hungry. Hungry for what? Blood, pain, young life. Lena felt a shiver but continued studying the symbols. There was a pattern there, a logic she was beginning to understand. Benjamin, she said slowly, what if the curse isn't about killing women? What if it's about power, about transferring life force from one person to another? What do you mean? Look at these symbols here, she pointed to a section of the altar. These are symbols of transfer, of exchange, and these here are symbols of binding, of connection. What if the ritual doesn't kill the woman to feed an entity? What if it transfers her life force to the man, making him more powerful, more influential? Benjamin moved closer to see better. That would explain the family's longevity, the wealth that never diminishes, the political influence that is maintained through generations. Lena was getting excited with the discovery. How old was your father when he died? 86 years old. He died only when the cancer... And your grandfather? 91. Men who should have died young from so much work in the fields, from so much stress, from so many vices. But they lived long, prosperous lives because they were literally feeding on the life force of other people. Benjamin was silent, processing the information. If you're right, if I'm right, then there's a way to break the curse. Not by killing, but by returning, reversing the flow of energy. How? Lena smiled, and it was a smile that would have frightened anyone who knew her before. By performing the ritual in reverse. Instead of taking my life force, I take yours. All of it. From all the living Walker men. That would kill them. Yes, it would. They looked at each other in silence, the weight of the discovery hanging between them like a storm cloud. Would you do that? Asked Benjamin. Kill innocent men to get revenge? Innocent men? Lena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Men who benefited from generations of murders? Who lived prosperous? Lives built on the bones of dead women? Who knew about the curse and never did anything to break it? And me? Would I be killed too? Lena approached him, touching his face with a tenderness that contrasted with the coldness of her words. You would, but you would die free. You would die knowing that no other woman will have to go through what your mother went through, what I'm going through. And you would live with that burden. I would live with that freedom. Benjamin held her hands, and for a moment, Lena saw the young man he had been, the man who had fallen in love with her mother and tried to protect her. Then so be it, he said. If I'm to die, let it be for a good cause. And as they planned the destruction of a century-old curse, Lena knew she had finally found her place in the world, not as a victim, but as an avenger. Not as Emma Sanders' daughter, but as the woman who would end the cycle of death that had haunted her family for generations. The full moon was just 3 days away. The next 3 days passed in a haze of feverish preparation and growing tension. Lena had transformed into a version of herself that she herself didn't recognize. Focused, relentless, studying the altar symbols with an obsessive dedication that reminded her of her mother when she became interested in something new. Benjamin watched her with a mixture of admiration and terror, seeing the woman he had fallen in love with transform into a force of nature. They had established a base in the house's library, spreading old books, yellowed scrolls, and notes across the large cherry-wood table. Lena had discovered that Benjamin possessed an impressive collection of occultist texts, an unwanted inheritance from generations of Walker men who had studied the dark arts. Here, she said, pointing to a passage in Latin in an 18th century grimoire. This confirms my theory. The ritual isn't about sacrifice, it's about the transfer of life force. Vitae vis translatio, transfer of the force of life. Benjamin leaned over the book, his chest touching her back. Even amid the tension of the preparations, the physical proximity still sent waves of heat through both of them. And what does that mean? That my plan can work. If we can reverse the symbols, redirect the energy. Lena turned to face him, and their faces were inches apart. We can drain all the life force that was stolen over generations and return it to the universe, killing all the Walker men in the process, liberating all the women they killed. Benjamin held her face with both hands. Including you. Including me. They kissed then, a desperate kiss laden with the urgency of those who know time is running out. Lena's hand slid through his hair, pulling him closer, while he pressed her against the table, scattering the old books across the floor. Lena, he murmured against her lips, if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. If it does, I need you to know. He interrupted his own movement, looking her in the eyes with an intensity that made her tremble. I need you to know that these 3 days with you have been worth a lifetime, that I regret nothing. Benjamin, and that if there were a way to give you my life so that you could live, I would give it without hesitation. Lena felt tears welling in her eyes. Don't talk like that. Why not? It's the truth. He kissed her again, this time with a tenderness that contrasted with the previous urgency. I love you, Lena Sanders. I love you as I loved your mother, but in a different way. Deeper. More definitive. I love you too, she whispered, and... The words came out like a confession torn from her soul. And that's why we'll succeed, because love is stronger than any curse. They were preparing to make love right there, on the sacred and profane books that could save or condemn them, when the sound of tires on the gravel road made them stop. Benjamin immediately pulled away, every muscle tense. We're not expecting anyone. Lena felt a chill down her spine. Could it be someone from town? No one from town comes here, not without being invited. He walked to the window and peered through the heavy curtains. What he saw made his face pale. Damn. What is it? My cousins, Richard and Edward Walker. His voice was laden with a tension Lena hadn't heard before. They know. Know what? That? You're here. That we've discovered things we shouldn't have discovered. Benjamin began to pace the library like a caged animal. They are the guardians of the family tradition, the ones who ensure that the curse is fulfilled generation after generation. Lena rose from the table, adjusting her clothes. How many are there? 2. But they're dangerous, Lena. Very dangerous. Richard is a retired federal marshal, has contacts everywhere. Edward is a businessman, but he has other activities. What kind of other activities? The kind that makes people disappear. Permanently. The sound of footsteps on the front porch echoed through the house. Heavy, determined footsteps of men who weren't there for a social visit. Hide the books, said Benjamin, already storing the most important grimoires in a secret shelf behind the fireplace. And when they come in, let me do the talking. Don't show that you know anything about the curse. Benjamin, if they're dangerous, they are. But I'm still the head of the family. That still means something. He took her hand and kissed it quickly. Trust me. The front door opened without ceremony, and Lena heard male voices echoing through the entrance hall. Polite, refined voices, but with a tone of authority that made her immediately understand why Benjamin was tense. Benjamin! The voice that shouted sounded familiar, but laden with an authority that accepted no refusals. We know you're there. We need to talk. Benjamin sighed and walked toward the library door. Stay here, he whispered to Lena, and whatever happens, don't interfere. He left the library, closing the door behind him. Lena put her ear to the wood, trying to hear the conversation happening in the hall. Richard, Edward, Benjamin's voice sounded controlled, but she could detect the underlying tension. What a pleasant surprise. Pleasant? The voice that responded was older, thicker, laden with decades of cigarettes and authority. It must be Richard. I don't know if you would find our visit so pleasant if you knew why we're here. Enlighten me. We've received concerning information, said a second voice, younger but equally threatening. Edward, Lena presumed. We heard that you have a visitor whose last name awakens unpleasant memories. There was a long pause, and Lena could imagine Benjamin weighing his options. I don't know what you're talking about. No? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Then you wouldn't mind if we took a look around the house, just to make sure you're not repeating past mistakes? This is my house. You have no right to search anything. We have every right, cousin. Edward's voice became colder. We are the guardians of the tradition, and when a family member threatens that tradition, we have not just the right but the duty to act. Lena felt her heart race. They knew exactly who she was and why she was there, and from the tone of their voices, they hadn't come to talk. Emma Sanders' daughter, continued Richard. Lena Sanders, 32 years old, historical document restorer at the University of Virginia. Arrived in town a week ago asking questions about our family, and 3 days ago disappeared from the hotel where she was staying. Interesting how you know all this, said Benjamin, and Lena could hear the anger growing in his voice. It's our job to know, just as it's our job to ensure that certain traditions are respected. Edward paused. Traditions that you've already tried to break once, and that cost us all dearly. What do you mean by that? Did you think we wouldn't discover the letter you wrote to Emma, about how you warned her about the ritual? Richard's voice was laden with contempt. Your act of rebellion almost destroyed our family. It cost us years to repair the damage. What damage? The lands we lost when the curse weakened. The investments, that failed. The political influence that plummeted. Edward seemed to be walking, his footsteps echoing through the hall. It took us 5 years to convince the entities that guarded the pact that you were just a foolish young man. 5 more. To rebuild what was lost. Lena felt a wave of nausea. They talked about entities, about pacts, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And now, continued Richard, you're making the same mistake, bringing Emma's daughter here, planning to repeat your previous folly. I didn't bring anyone here. No? Edward laughed. Then she came on her own? What an extraordinary coincidence. The daughter of the woman who almost destroyed our family appears at your door exactly 3 days before the full moon. There was another long silence, and Lena imagined Benjamin trying to find a way to protect her without blatantly lying. Even if she were here, he finally said, even if I had feelings for her, that doesn't mean I'm going to repeat the mistakes of the past. No? Richard's voice became dangerously low. Then you would fulfill your duty? Complete the ritual as you should have done 20 years ago? If necessary. Lena felt as if she had been stabbed. Even knowing that Benjamin was lying to protect her, hearing those words hurt more than she expected. Excellent, said Edward. Then you won't mind if we stay to watch, to ensure that this time everything is done correctly. Watch? The ritual, of course. After all, after what happened with Emma, we need to be sure that you will complete your part of the family agreement. Lena felt panic spread through her chest. If the cousins stayed, if they watched the ritual, how could they execute the plan to reverse the curse? How could they break a century-old cycle with 2 guardians, ensuring that everything was done? The traditional way. That's not necessary, said Benjamin, but his voice had lost its previous firmness. Yes, it is, replied Richard. And just to ensure there will be no more misunderstandings, we brought some things from town. Lena heard the sound of metal being manipulated, as if someone were opening a suitcase or briefcase. Recognize this? Asked Edward. There was a pause, and then Benjamin uttered a low curse. Where did you get that? Let's say we have well-informed friends. Friends who know the value of keeping certain traditions alive. Richard's voice was laden with dark satisfaction. This dagger was used in the first ritual, over 100 years ago. It has been kept safe, waiting for the right moment to return to its original purpose. Lena felt an icy chill run down her spine. They hadn't come just to watch the ritual. They had come prepared to execute it themselves if necessary. "And if I refuse?" asked Benjamin. "Then you'll join the young woman on the altar," replied Edward with a naturalness that made Lena cringe. After all, a double sacrifice would be even more powerful, especially considering the emotional bond between you. "You're talking about murder." "We're talking about survival," corrected Richard. "The survival of a lineage that has prospered for generations thanks to this pact. You think our wealth, our influence, our longevity happened by chance? And if I agree to perform the ritual, will you leave? We'll watch to ensure it's done properly. After that," Lena heard the sound of someone moving. "Let's say you'll have all the freedom to live with the consequences of your choices." Lena couldn't bear to listen anymore. She opened the library, ducked silently and peered down the corridor. She could see 3 silhouettes in the entrance hall, Benjamin with his back to her, and 2 men in dark suits in front of him. Richard was older, grey hair, military bearing that betrayed his years. As a federal marshal, Edward was younger, elegant, the type of man who could pass for a successful businessman if it weren't for his eyes cold as ice. "Well," said Edward, closing what appeared to be a briefcase, "now that we've clarified our positions, how about meeting our special guest?" Before Benjamin could respond, Edward began walking toward the corridor where Lena was hiding. She quickly backed away, closing the library door and desperately searching for a way to escape. The library had only one exit, the door through which she had entered. The windows were too high and too small to serve as an escape route. She was cornered. The footsteps approached the door and Lena heard Edward's voice outside. "Miss Sanders, we know you're in there. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Lena looked around desperately, searching for something she could use as a weapon. Her eyes landed on the secret shelf where Benjamin had hidden the grimoires. A crazy idea began to form in her mind. The door opened and Edward entered, smiling. "There you are, how good to finally meet you." He was handsome in a disturbing way, symmetrical features, perfect smile, eyes that seemed to see through people's souls. But there was something wrong with that smile, something that made Lena think of predators that play with their prey before killing it. "Richard, Benjamin, I found our special guest." The other 2 men appeared at the door, and Lena found herself surrounded by 3 pairs of eyes that studied her as if she were a laboratory animal. "Impressive," said Richard, circling around her. "The resemblance to Emma is disturbing. Same eyes, same hair, same arrogance." "Arrogance?" Lena found her voice, surprising herself with the firmness she managed to put into the words. "Of thinking you can change century-old traditions," explained Edward. "Of thinking that your love for our cousin is stronger than forces that have existed since before you were born." "Maybe it is." Richard laughed. "Your mother said the same thing. Look where that got her." The anger that Lena had felt since arriving at the farm finally exploded. "My mother died because you are a family of psychopaths who hide behind superstitions to justify murders." The slap came so fast that she had no time to dodge. Edward's hand hit her face with a force that threw her against the bookshelf. "Watch your words, young lady," he said, and all pretense of civility had disappeared from his voice. "You're talking to men who have done much worse for much less." Benjamin stepped forward, but Richard prevented him from approaching, placing a hand on his chest. "Oh no," said the older man. "You've caused enough problems. This time, you'll stay quiet and observe how things should be done." Lena touched her face where she had been hit, tasting blood in her mouth. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the fury burning in her chest. "You think you're powerful?" she said, rising slowly. "You think you control supernatural forces. But you know what I think." "What?" asked Edward, clearly amused. "I think you're just pathetic men who never accomplished anything on their own, who need to kill innocent women to feel important." This time, it was Richard who moved, but instead of slapping, he drew a pistol from his waist and pointed it at Lena's. "Head is enough," he said, his voice ice-cold. "You will be quiet, you will cooperate, and perhaps your death will be quick. Continue with that attitude, and I'll ensure it's as painful as possible. Richard, Benjamin tried to intervene, but Edward silenced him with a look. Your cousin chose to defend a stranger instead of his own family, said Edward. The consequences are his. Lena looked at Benjamin and saw desperation in his eyes. She saw a man who wanted to protect her, but was completely out of options. She saw love and regret fighting in his expression, and suddenly she knew exactly what to do. All right, she said, raising her hands in a sign of surrender. You win, I'll cooperate. Richard lowered the gun slightly, but kept his finger on the trigger. What cooperation? I'll participate in the ritual, voluntarily. Lena forced herself to smile, even with the taste of blood in her mouth. After all, if it's such an important family tradition, who am I to interfere? Edward frowned. What are you plotting? Nothing, just accepting my fate. Lena walked slowly toward the table where the books were still scattered. But if I'm going to die, I'd like to understand exactly how the ritual works, to be house prepared. She picked up one of the grimoires and opened it to a random page, pretending to study the symbols. Interesting, she murmured. These symbols here, they're for energy transfer, aren't they? Edward and Richard exchanged a look of surprise. How do you know that? Asked Richard. I'm a restorer of historical documents. I've seen similar symbols in ancient texts. Lena turned a few pages, looking for a specific section she had studied in the last few days. And these here are for reversing energy flow. Reversal? Edward approached, clearly intrigued despite himself. Yes. Instead of transferring energy from the victim to the beneficiary, these symbols would reverse the process. Lena looked up, meeting Benjamin's eyes. He was beginning to understand what she was planning. I imagine it would be interesting to see what would happen if someone used these symbols in the ritual. Richard snatched the book from her hands. This is dangerous. These texts are not for amateurs. Of course not, but it's fascinating how small changes can have enormous consequences. Lena smiled again, and this time there was something genuinely dangerous in her expression. For example, if someone knew how to modify the altar, how to redirect the energy accumulated over generations. What are you suggesting? Edward's voice was becoming tense. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to end this charade once, and for all. Lena turned to face the three men. I'm suggesting that we perform the ritual exactly as it's written in the original books, without the modifications that your family made over the years. What modifications? Asked Benjamin, clearly confused. Lena pointed to a section of the grimoire that Richard still held. The original ritual wasn't about killing women to give power to men. It was about balancing energies, about giving strength to those who needed it to face difficult times. Your family corrupted the process, turned something sacred into something vile. You don't know what you're talking about, said Edward, but there was nervousness in his voice, and don't I? Lena walked to the secret shelf and began to remove the other grimoires, then explained this to me. She opened a different book, older, written in a calligraphy that seemed to be from the 17th century. This is the original text of the ritual. Look here, to balance the forces of life and death, to restore the energy stolen from the earth. There's nothing about human sacrifice, nothing about transferring life force from women to men. Richard and Edward approached, studying the text with growing attention. This isn't possible, murmured Richard. Our family has practiced this ritual for generations. Practicing a corrupted version, interrupted Lena, a version that someone modified for their own benefit. Probably your great-great-grandfather, when he decided he preferred personal power to natural balance. Edward took the book from her hands, comparing the texts. Lena saw the exact moment when he understood the implications. If you're right, he said slowly. If I'm right, you've spent 100 years killing innocent women for nothing. All the power you think you have, all the family's influence, was built on lies and unnecessary murders. Richard uttered a curse and began to pace the library like a caged animal. This can't be true, it can't. Why not? Lena was gaining confidence, seeing that she had planted seeds of doubt in the two men. You think you're the first powerful men in history to use superstition to justify atrocities? You think you're special in some way? But the power, began Edward. What power? You're rich because you inherited valuable land. You're influential because you maintained political contacts through generations. You live long because you have access to the best medicine money can buy. Lena laughed, and it was a cruel sound. The only supernatural thing here is your ability to convince yourselves that you're something more than common murderers. The kame. Silence that followed was heavy, laden with tension and uncomfortable discoveries. Lena saw Richard and Edward struggling to process the possibility that everything they believed in was a lie. Benjamin was the one who broke the silence. What if she's right? He asked. What if we've been killing for nothing for 100 years? Then, Richard stopped pacing and looked directly at Lena. Then this young woman here has given us an opportunity to repair the mistake. What do you mean? Asked Edward. By performing the ritual the right way. For the first time in 100 years, doing exactly as it should have been done from the beginning. Lena felt her heart race. This wasn't exactly what she had planned, but maybe it would work even better. And what would that involve? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Restoring the balance, returning to the earth all the energy that was stolen from it over generations. Richard smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. Using you as a channel. Channel. To transfer all the vital force accumulated by our family back to the source. To break the cycle once and for all. Edward frowned. That would be our redemption, completed Richard. And if it killed all of us in the process, well, maybe that's what we deserve. Lena looked at Benjamin, trying to convey with her eyes that she needed him to trust her. That everything could still work out if they were smart about it. Then it's decided, she said. We'll perform the ritual tonight, the right way. Tonight, Edward protested. The full moon will only be tomorrow. The moon is full enough, said Lena, looking out the window at the sky that was beginning to darken. And frankly, I don't know if we could endure another day of this tension. Richard laughed, and it was a genuinely amused sound. I like you, girl. You have courage. I have necessity, she corrected. Necessity to end this once and for all. And as the four began to prepare for a night that would change everything, Lena silently prayed that her gamble would pay off. That the knowledge she had acquired in the last few days would be enough to break a century-old curse. That this time, finally, love would be stronger than death. The moon was rising over the mountains of Virginia, and Benedictine Farm was preparing for its last ritual. The moon was at its zenith when they left the house toward the chapel. Lena walked in front, followed by Benjamin, with Richard and Edward flanking the group like guards. The mist that had covered the property during the day had thickened, transforming the scenery into a dreamlike and threatening landscape. The oak trees seemed like somber sentinels, and the wind that descended from the ridge carried a cold that cut to the bone. Lena had dressed in a white cotton dress she had found in Emma's wardrobe, a deliberate choice that she knew would emotionally affect Benjamin. She wanted him to remember why they were doing this, why it was worth risking everything. Her hair was loose, falling in dark waves over her shoulders, and in her right hand she carried a grimoire that she had carefully selected. Are you sure about the symbols? Benjamin whispered when the cousins fell a few steps behind, checking their equipment. I am, she replied, pressing the book against her chest. I studied every detail in the last few hours. If my theory is correct, and if it's wrong. Lena looked at him, seeing the fear in the dark eyes she had learned to love. Then we'll die together, and at least Emma will be avenged. Benjamin held her free hand, intertwining their fingers. I'd prefer to live together. I would too, but if that's not possible. She squeezed his hand. I don't regret anything. The chapel stood before them like an open wound in the landscape. The ancient stones seemed to absorb the moonlight instead of reflecting it, and the vines covering the walls undulated in a breeze that touched nothing else around. It was as if the building existed in its own dimension, separated from the normal world by an invisible barrier. Impressive how the place maintains its atmosphere, commented Edward, clearly uncomfortable. Even after all these years. Some places retain energy, said Richard, checking the pistol at his waist. especially places where much blood has been spilled. They stopped in front of the heavy wooden door, and for a moment no one moved. It was as if they all understood that once they crossed that threshold, there would be no return. What happened in that chapel would change their lives forever, or end them. "Well," said Lena, breaking the silence, "let's get this over with." She pushed the door, and the creak that followed echoed through the night like a cry of agony. The interior of the chapel was exactly as they had left it, the black stone altar dominating the space, the bones stacked on the walls like silent witnesses to generations of horror. But there was something different, an energy in the air, a tension that made hairs stand on end and skin tingle. It was as if the building itself was waiting, breathing, preparing for what was to come. "My God," murmured Edward, looking around with an expression that mixed fascination and disgust. "How many women died here?" "Many," replied Richard, placing the briefcase he carried on a side table. "But if Lena is right, this will be the last." Lena approached the altar, placing the grimoire on the black stone. The engraved symbols seemed to pulse in the light of the candles that Benjamin was lighting around the perimeter. She ran her fingers over the designs, feeling the ancient energy emanating from the stone. "There's something I need to know before we begin," she said, turning to face the three men. "The original ritual, does it require the consent of the person who will be the channel?" Richard frowned. "Consent?" "Yes. In the oldest texts, there are references to a voluntary choice. The person who will serve as the channel must consciously accept the role." "And why does that matter?" asked Edward. "Because if I don't truly accept, if there's any internal resistance, the ritual may not work. Or worse, it could turn against all of us." Benjamin stopped lighting candles and looked at her with concern. "Lena, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." She walked to the center of the circle engraved on the floor. "And I accept. Consciously, voluntarily, I accept to serve as a channel to break this curse." The words echoed through the chapel with a weight that surprised them all. It was as if the air itself had thickened, as if invisible forces had awakened at the sound of her declaration. "Very well," said Richard, opening the briefcase and removing the ancient dagger. The blade shone with its own glow, as if made of metal that didn't exist in the natural world. "Then let's begin." Lena opened the grimoire to a specific page she had marked. "Wait. First, we need to modify the symbols on the altar." "Modify? How?" "Some of the engravings need to be adjusted to ensure that the energy flows in the right direction." She took from the pocket of her dress a piece of white chalk she had found in the library. "If you'll allow me." Edward and Richard exchanged glances but nodded. Lena began to draw over the existing symbols, altering lines, adding curves, transforming patterns of absorption into patterns of release. Each stroke was deliberate, based on hours of study and an instinctive understanding that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Benjamin watched her work, and she could feel the tension emanating from him. He knew she was doing more than simple modifications. She was preparing a trap that could destroy all the Walker men at once. "Ready," she said, stepping back. The altar was now covered with white symbols that glowed strangely in the candlelight. "Now we can begin." Richard approached with the dagger, but Lena raised a hand to stop him. "No," she said, "that's not how it works." "What do you mean?" "The original ritual doesn't use blades. It uses pure energy, channeled through words and intention." Lena opened the grimoire to a different page. "Look here. Let life return to life. Let stolen energy be restored. Let the circle close as it was opened." Edward approached to read over her shoulder. "This is different from the texts we know, because you were using corrupted versions," explained Lena, "versions that someone modified to serve selfish purposes." She began to walk around the altar, reciting words in Latin that she had memorized. Her voice echoed through the chapel with a strange resonance, as if the building itself was amplifying the words. "Vitae vis ad fontem revertatur." May the force of life return to the source. The air in the chapel began to change. An inexplicable breeze began to circulate, making the candle flames dance without extinguishing them. The symbols on the altar began to glow with their own light, pulsing, in rhythm with Lena's words. Quod furtum fuit, nunc liberatur. May what was stolen now be liberated. Richard took a step back, clearly nervous. Something's happening. It's the ritual, said Edward, but his voice also carried uncertainty. This is how it should be. Benjamin approached Lena, and she could see concern in his eyes. Are you sure what you're doing? Trust me, she whispered, continuing to walk and recite. Umbrae qui mortui sunt, in lucem venite, shadows that are dead, come to the light. It was then that the apparitions began. First it was just a whitish mist forming in the corners of the chapel. Then slowly the mists began to take human form. Women in dresses from different eras, all young, all beautiful, all with looks of infinite sadness. Jesus Christ, murmured Richard, drawing his pistol. No, shouted Lena. Don't hurt them. They are the victims. They've come to witness their liberation. The apparitions circled the chapel like a ghostly procession. Lena recognized some from the portraits she had seen in the house, the first wives, of the Walker men, the private tutors, the governesses who had disappeared over the years, and among them a figure that made her heart stop. Mother, she whispered. Emma Sanders walked among the other women, more solid than the rest, her eyes fixed on her daughter with an expression of love and pride that made Lena want to cry. She can't be here, said Edward, retreating until he hit the piles of bones. She was cremated. We saw the death certificate. The body was cremated, agreed Lena, without stopping her recitation. But the soul remained trapped here, along with all the others. Emma approached Lena, extending a translucent hand that almost touched her daughter's face. My girl, her voice echoed in Lena's mind like a distant whisper. You've grown so strong, so brave. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything that happened. Don't be. You're doing what I didn't have the courage to do. You're ending this. Lena continued the ritual, but now her voice was laden with emotion. The other women positioned themselves around the altar, forming a circle of spectral witnesses, and as she recited, as the symbols glowed more intensely, she began to feel something being sucked from her own body. Lena! Shouted Benjamin, realizing she was beginning to faint. Stop, you're killing yourself. I can't stop, she replied, struggling to stay on her feet. I need to complete. It was then that Richard understood what was really happening. She tricked us, he said, pointing the pistol at Lena. She's not transferring energy from the dead. She's draining ours. Edward looked around, noticing that both he and Richard were beginning to look older, weaker. Lines appeared on their faces, hair darkened or whitened, muscles seemed to wither. Stop this now, shouted Edward, drawing his own weapon. I can't, repeated Lena, now kneeling on the floor but still reciting. Heiko, the ritual needs to be completed. Benjamin placed himself between the guns and Lena, arms spread. If you shoot her, you'll have to shoot me first. Get out of the way, Benjamin, said Richard, but his voice was weaker. She's killing us all. Then so be it, he replied. We deserve to die. All of us deserve it. It was Emma who intervened. The apparition of Emma Sanders materialized between the armed men and her daughter, temporarily becoming solid enough to push the weapons down. Enough violence, she said, and her voice echoed through the chapel like the sound of distant bells. Enough death. Let the girl finish what she started. Richard tried to raise the gun again, but found that his arms wouldn't obey. The energy was being drained from his body more rapidly now, leaving him too weak to resist. This cannot be happening, murmured Edward, falling to his knees. It can and it is, said Lena, finding the strength to stand again. All the lives you stole, all the energy you sucked from innocent women, is being returned to the universe, and you're paying the price. She continued the ritual, her voice growing in power and authority. The symbols on the altar now shone like stars, and the energy circulating through the chapel was visible, like golden lightning dancing in the air. Et sic finis fit initium, and so the end becomes the beginning. The apparitions of the dead women began to glow too, becoming sharper, more present. It was as if they were recovering the life that had been stolen from them. Gratia vobis. Thank you, whispered Emma approaching Lena again. "Now we can rest." "Not yet, Mother," said Lena, tears streaming down her face. "There's still one thing I need to do." She turned to Benjamin, who was watching everything with an expression of astonishment and terror. "Benjamin Walker," she said, using the formal tone of the ritual, "you carry the blood of murderers, but you also carry the possibility of redemption. Do you accept to pay for the crimes of your lineage?" He didn't hesitate. "I accept." "Do you accept that your life be used to balance the deaths that your family caused?" "I accept." "And do you accept that in doing so, you will be breaking the cycle forever?" "I accept." Lena extended her hand to him, and when Benjamin took it, a current of energy passed between them. But it wasn't the destructive energy that was draining Richard and Edward. It was something different, something transformative. "Through love," recited Lena, "through voluntary sacrifice, through the conscious choice to break evil traditions, I redeem you." The light emanating from the symbols on the altar intensified until it became blinding. Richard and Edward screamed as their vital forces were completely drained, their bodies transforming into empty shells that collapsed onto the stone floor. But Benjamin remained standing. "I don't understand," he murmured, looking at his own hands that still held Lena's. "Why didn't I die?" "Because you chose love instead of power," explained Emma, smiling at the man who had loved her and who now protected her daughter. "Because you truly repented. Because you were willing to die for her." "And because," added Lena, "the original ritual was never about killing. It was about transforming, about giving people the chance to choose who they want to be." The apparitions of the dead women began to fade, their forms becoming increasingly translucent. But before departing, each approached Lena and whispered a word of gratitude. Emma was the last to leave. "Take care of him," she said, touching her daughter's face one last time, "and let him take care of you. You deserve the happiness that your father and I could never have." "Mom, I love you, my girl. I always loved you. And now I can finally rest knowing that you are free." Emma disappeared in a golden light that spread through the chapel like the sunrise. The other women followed her, until Lena and Benjamin were left alone with the lifeless bodies of the cousins. The chapel was silent now, but it was a different silence. It was no longer laden with pain and horror, but with peace. The piles of bones on the walls had disappeared, transformed into golden dust that danced in the air like stardust. "It's over," whispered Lena, falling into Benjamin's arms. "It's really over." He held her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. "Too. You almost died, when you were channeling all that energy. But I didn't die. And neither did you." She looked at him, seeing that despite everything that had happened, he looked younger, as if an immense weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "We're free, Benjamin, finally free." They left the chapel hand in hand, leaving the bodies of Richard and Edward behind. Dawn was beginning to lighten the sky over the Virginia mountains, and for the first time in generations, Benedictine Farm breathed peace. "What are we going to do now?" asked Benjamin as they walked back to the house. "We're going to live," Lena replied simply. "We're going to love each other. We're going to build a life that honors the memory of the women who died, but that is our own. And the farm, the property." Lena stopped and looked at the grand house that rose before them, golden in the light of dawn. "We're going to transform it, maybe a center for historical studies, or a refuge for women who need protection, something that brings life instead of death." Benjamin smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy smile she had seen since arriving at the farm. "I like the idea," he said. "I like it very much." They entered the house, and for the first time, the corridors didn't seem haunted. The portraits on the walls were still there, but now they seemed like just old paintings without the oppressive weight of the past. In the library, Lena gathered all the grimoires and occultist texts in a pile in the center of the room. "What are you going to do with them?" asked Benjamin. "Burn them," she replied without hesitation. "This knowledge caused too much suffering. It's time to let it die." They lit a fire in the fireplace and one by one fed the flames with the books that had documented a century of horror. As the texts burned, Lena felt as if invisible cords that tied her to the past were being cut. "There's one thing I still need to know," said Benjamin as they watched the last book turn to ashes. "What?" "If you knew from the beginning that the ritual could kill me, why did you risk it? Why didn't you simply run?" Lena turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "Because some things are worth more than life itself," she replied. "Because breaking this cycle of violence was more important than my safety. And because—" She paused, gathering courage to say the words she had kept in her heart. "Because I love you. And I couldn't live knowing that other women would suffer what my mother suffered." Benjamin kissed her then, a kiss that contained promises of a future that both thought they would never have. Future free of curses, free of guilt, free of secrets from the past. When they separated, the sun had fully risen, illuminating the library with a golden light that transformed everything into something magical. "So that's it," said Lena, resting, her head on his chest. "We're just a man and a woman who love each other, in an old house in the Virginia countryside." "Just that," agreed Benjamin, kissing the top of her head. "And it's more than enough." Outside, Benedictine Farm was awakening to a new day. The first day in more than a century without the weight of a curse, without the ghost of past deaths, without the shadow of future sacrifices. It was the first day of a new life. But there was still one last surprise waiting for them. That afternoon, as they rested on the porch, observing the tranquil movement of the property, a car came up the gravel road. From it emerged a middle-aged woman, elegant, carrying a folder of documents. "Mr. Walker?" she called. "I'm Dr. Martha Silver, attorney. I need to speak with you about matters related to the family inheritance." Benjamin and Lena exchanged apprehensive glances. What kind of legal complication awaited them now? "Is there a problem?" asked Benjamin. "On the contrary," replied the attorney, smiling. "There's a very specific clause in the will of the Walker family patriarch, dated 1897, a clause that would only become valid if certain specific conditions were met." "What conditions?" "If the curse were broken through true love and voluntary sacrifice, if the last male heir chose redemption instead of power." The attorney opened the folder and removed a yellow document. "According to this will, if these conditions were met, all the Walker family fortune should be converted into a fund to help women victims of violence." Lena felt as if she had been struck by lightning. "How is this possible?" "It appears that the original patriarch had remorse at the end of his life. He left very specific instructions for the case of one of his descendants deciding to correct the mistakes of the past." The attorney smiled at both of them. "Congratulations, you've just inherited one of the largest philanthropic fortunes in Virginia." Benjamin and Lena looked at each other, still processing the information. "This means," Ma began Lena, "this means that you have the resources to do anything you want, to help as many people as you need, to ensure that the suffering the Walker family caused is transformed into something positive." As the attorney explained the legal details, Lena felt a familiar presence beside her. She turned and for a moment saw Emma smiling at her, waving goodbye before disappearing for good. The message was clear. Even in the end, love had triumphed over evil. And now, finally, the Walker family story would have a happy ending. 6. Months had passed since the night that changed everything. Benedictine Farm now breathed a completely different energy. Where before there were shadows and whispers of past deaths, now there was laughter of children playing in the yard and voices of women talking on the porch. The transformation had been deeper and more beautiful than Lena had ever imagined. The Emma Sanders Shelter Center had become a reality, with a speed that surprised even Benjamin. The Walker family fortune, finally free from the bonds of its dark origin, had been channeled to create something genuinely good. The grand house had been renovated to shelter women and children in vulnerable situations, offering not just shelter, but education, professional training and psychological support. Lena was in the transformed library, now a study center and community library, organizing a new shipment of books when she felt familiar arms encircling her waist from behind. working. Too hard again, murmured Benjamin against her neck, sending familiar shivers down her spine. Someone needs to catalogue these American history books that arrived from Charlottesville, she replied, but allowed herself to relax against his chest. The women are eager to start the adult literacy course. The books can wait 15 more minutes, he said, turning her in his arms. You've been working for 6 hours without a break. Lena looked at the man who had become not just her companion, but her partner in every sense of the word. Benjamin had completely transformed in the last few months. The weight he carried on his shoulders had disappeared, replaced by a lightness that made him look 10 years younger. He smiled constantly now, especially when he looked at... "Sure, you're right," she conceded, putting away the last book on the shelf. "But only 15 minutes. Half an hour," he negotiated, kissing her quickly. 20 minutes. Deal. They left the library hand in hand, passing through what was once the main hall and now functioned as a common area. Several women were sitting in comfortable armchairs, some sewing, others reading, some simply talking. Children played on the colorful rug that occupied the center of the room. "Miss Lena! Miss Lena!" A girl of about 8 ran toward her, curly, hair flying. "Look what I drew!" Lena knelt to the child's height, receiving a colorful drawing that showed a large house surrounded by flowers and a rainbow. "It's beautiful, Julia. Is it our farm?" "It is, and look here." The girl pointed to 2 figures holding hands in front of the house. "It's you and Benjamin. My mum said you're going to get married." Lena felt her face heat up and looked at Benjamin, who was smiling with that way that made her stomach do flips. "Your mum said that, did she?" asked Lena, trying to keep her voice casual. "She did, and she said it's going to be the most beautiful party in the world, with a 3-tiered cake and flowers from the garden." Benjamin knelt beside Lena, studying the drawing with feigned seriousness. 3 tiers. "Now that's an important party," he said. "Do you think Miss Lena would agree to a party like that?" Julia looked at Lena with big, hopeful eyes. "You would, wouldn't you, Miss Lena? It would be so beautiful." Before Lena could answer, Mary Santos, Julia's mother and one of the first women to arrive at the center, approached to fetch her daughter. "Julia, stop bothering Miss Lena with these questions," said Mary, but she was smiling. "She and Benjamin have more important things to think about." "But there's nothing more important than a wedding," protested Julia. Lena laughed, kissing the girl's forehead. "You might be right, little one, but sometimes adults take a little longer to reach the right conclusions." Benjamin helped her stand up, and she saw something different in his eyes, an intensity that wasn't there moments before. "Shall we go to the garden?" he suggested. They went out through the back door, passing through what had become a community garden. Well-tended beds produced vegetables and herbs for the center's kitchen, and there was a small orchard where the children liked to play. The plum tree where Emma and Benjamin had been photographed was still there, now surrounded by a rose garden that Lena had planted in memory of all the women who had died. "On the farm." "Lena," said Benjamin when they reached the shade of the plum tree, "I need to ask you something." "What?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, holding her hands. "Are you happy here?" The question surprised her. "What do you mean?" "You left your life in Charlottesville, your job at the university, your friends, all of that to stay here, with me, to build this center. Sometimes I wonder if you're not regretting it." Lena studied his face, seeing the insecurity that still occasionally appeared. Even after everything they had been through together, Benjamin sometimes still doubted that he deserved the happiness they had found. "Benjamin Walker," she said, placing her hands on his face, "you're crazy if you think I could regret anything. This is the life I always dreamed of having, meaningful, transformative, full of love. And I have all of this because I have you. Are you sure?" "Absolutely." She leaned in and kissed him, pouring all the certainty she felt into that gesture. "But since we're talking about the future..." "Yes?" "Julia isn't the only one who's been asking about a wedding." Benjamin laughed, pulling her closer. "Oh, really? And what have you been answering?" "That certain men are very slow to make important decisions." "Slow?" He feigned indignation. "I wanted to be sure you were truly happy before." "Before?" "What?" Benjamin released her hands and, to Lena's surprise, knelt right there under the plum tree. From his shirt pocket, he took a small velvet box that made her heart stop. "Lena Sanders," he said, opening the box to reveal an antique gold ring with a green stone that sparkled in the light filtered through the leaves. "This ring belonged to my great-grandmother, the only Walker woman who died of old age in her own bed, surrounded by children and grandchildren. She broke the family tradition long before us, refusing to be a victim or an accomplice." Lena felt tears welling. In her eyes, "I want this ring to represent a new beginning, not just for us, but for everything the Walker family can be from now on." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me, Lena? Let me spend the rest of my life loving you, protecting you, building good things by your side." The tears were now flowing freely down her face. "Benjamin, let me be the man your mother would want me to be. The man you deserve. The man who can give you the family, the happiness, the future we both dream of." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and the fit was perfect, as if it had been made for her. Benjamin stood and kissed her, spinning her in the air as she laughed and cried at the same time. "I love you so much," he murmured against her lips. "So much it sometimes hurts. I love you too. More than I thought it was possible to love someone." They were so lost in each other that they didn't notice they had gained an audience. When they finally separated, they saw that several women and children from the center were on the back porch, applauding and shouting with joy. "Yay! There's going to be a wedding," shouted Julia, jumping with happiness. "And it's going to be the most beautiful party in the world," added another child. Mary Santos approached with tears in her eyes. "May God bless you both. You deserve all the happiness in the world." The other women approached to congratulate the couple, and for a few minutes the farm was taken over by a festive atmosphere. Lena looked around, seeing the happy faces of the people who had become her chosen family, and felt her heart overflowing with gratitude. Later that night, after all the impromptu celebrations had ended, and the center had returned to its tranquil, nightly routine, Lena and Benjamin found themselves on the front porch, sharing a bottle of wine and planning their future. "When do you want to get married?" asked Benjamin, playing with the ring on her finger. "As soon as possible," she replied without hesitation. "I see no reason to wait." "Neither do I. How about next month? We can do it right here, in the garden." "Perfect. Simple. Surrounded by the people we love." And they remained silent for a moment, just enjoying the tranquility of the night. It was hard to believe that just 6 months before, that place was haunted by centuries of suffering. "Benjamin," Lena said suddenly, "have you ever regretted it? Breaking the curse, losing your cousins, changing everything?" "Never," he replied without hesitation. "Richard and Edward made their choices. They knew what was happening and chose power instead of love. I can't feel guilty about that." "And what about the rest? The loneliness you lived for so long, the guilt you carried. All of that led me to you. If I had to go through it all again to find you, I would without question." Lena nestled against him, listening to the steady beats of his heart. "Sometimes I have the feeling that my mother planned all this," she said, "as if she knew that one day I would come looking for the truth, that I would find you, that we would be able to break the cycle. Maybe she did plan it. Emma was always smarter than any of us imagined. I have a feeling she would be proud of what we've built here. I'm sure she would be." In the following week, preparations for the wedding took over the farm. The women at the center insisted on helping with everything, from the flowers, from the garden to the cake that would be made in the communal kitchen. Lena discovered that planning a wedding with the help of 20 enthusiastic women was both a gratifying and exhausting experience. "Miss Lena, you have to wear your mother's dress," suggested Carla, one of the newest residents. "It would be so symbolic." Lena had thought about it, but Emma's wedding dress was still stored in the attic of the house, and she didn't know if she would be able to handle the emotional burden. "I don't know, Carla. Maybe it's better to buy a new dress." "Nonsense!" interrupted Mary Santos. "Your mother would be honored to know you wore her dress, and besides it would be as if she were present at the wedding." Benjamin, who had been quiet during the discussion, approached Lena. "The decision is yours," he said. "But if you want to go up there and take a look, I'll go with you." That afternoon they climbed to the attic together. The space had been cleaned and organized in recent months, but it still held many memories of the past. Lena found Emma's dress in an old leather trunk, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. When she unfolded it, she caught her breath. It was a simple but elegant dress, made of ivory silk with delicate embroidery on the sleeves and skirt. The cut was timeless, something that would look beautiful both in 1997 and in 2025. "It's perfect," whispered Benjamin. "It will look beautiful on you." Lena held the dress against her body, imagining what it would be like to wear it. Suddenly she felt a familiar presence in the attic, nothing visual, just a sensation of approval and love that enveloped her like an embrace. "I think my mother approves," she said, smiling through tears. "I'm sure she does." The wedding day dawned clear and sunny, as if the sky itself were celebrating. The farm's garden had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with arrangements of roses and jasmines from the garden itself, creating a natural altar under the plum tree. Lena got ready in the room that had been her mother's, now hers and Benjamin's. Emma's dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Mary Santos helped her with her hair, creating an elegant bun decorated with small white flowers. "You look radiant," said Mary, giving the final touch to the veil, a piece of lace that had belonged to Benjamin's great-grandmother, the woman, who broke the family traditions long before them. "I'm nervous," admitted Lena. "That's normal. But just look at you. You're about to marry the man of your dreams in a house that you've transformed into a place of hope, surrounded by people who love you. If that's not a fairy tale, I don't know what is." When the time came, Lena descended the main staircase of the house, crossed the living room where the guests were gathered, and went out to the garden. There weren't many people, just the women and children from the center, some employees who had become close friends, attorney Martha Silver, who had become a kind of godmother to the project, and the local pastor, who had agreed to perform the ceremony. But when Lena saw Benjamin waiting for her under the plum tree, wearing a simple but elegant suit with a white rose in his lapel, nothing else mattered. The world reduced to his eyes, to the smile that lit up his face when he saw her, to the way he extended his hand to receive her. "You look beautiful," he whispered when she reached the improvised altar. "You look handsome too," she replied, nervously adjusting his tie. The ceremony was simple and moving. The pastor spoke about love, about second chances, about how two people can unite to create something greater than themselves. Lena and Benjamin had written their own vows, and when the time came to pronounce them, there were tears in the eyes of all present. "Benjamin," began Lena, holding his hands, "when I arrived at this farm, I was looking for answers about my past. I never imagined I would find my future. You taught me that love can heal wounds that seemed incurable, that it can transform places of pain into places of hope. I promise to love you every day of my life, to support your dreams, to be your partner in all the adventures that await us." "Lena," said Benjamin, his voice choked with emotion, "you saved me from myself, showed me that I could be more than my past, more than the mistakes of my family. With you I learned that true love isn't just about passion, it's about choosing every day to build a life together. I promise to protect you, to honor you, and to work by your side to make this world a better place." When the pastor declared, "Them husband and wife," the kiss that followed was sweet and promising, sealing not just their union but a new chapter in their lives. The party that followed was small but memorable. They danced in the garden to music, playing on a small sound system, ate cake made with love by the women of the center, and laughed until their cheeks hurt. When night fell and the guests retired, Lena and Benjamin found themselves alone on the porch watching the stars shining over the farm. "So," said Benjamin, pulling her closer, "how does it feel being Mrs. Walker?" "Strange," she admitted. But good strange, as if I finally found my place in the world. And where is that place? By your side, always by your side. They kissed under the stars, and Lena felt as if the universe was finally in balance. Everything she had been through, her mother's death, years of unanswered questions, the discovery of the dark secrets of the Walker family, the danger they faced together, all of it had led to this perfect moment. "Benjamin," she said suddenly, "I want to tell you something." "What?" "I'm pregnant." He remained still for a moment, processing the information. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" "I did 3 tests yesterday. I wanted to be sure before telling you." Benjamin picked her up and spun her in the chair, both laughing with pure joy. "We're going to have a baby," he said, amazed. "A baby who will grow up without curses, without dark secrets, just with love. A baby who will represent a completely new future for the Walker family. Boy or girl, do you have a preference? Just that it be healthy and happy. And that it has your eyes and your heart," he replied, kissing her again. 2 years later, Benedictine Farm had become one of the most respected shelter centers in the state of Virginia. The Emma Sanders Center had helped more than 200 women and children rebuild their lives, offering not just temporary shelter, but tools for definitive independence. Lena was in the garden, watching her 18-month-old daughter play among the flowers. Isabella, they had named the girl in honor of Benjamin's lost sister, was a happy and curious child, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined smile. "Mommy Flower," shouted Isabella, running with wobbly legs toward her mother, holding a rosebud she had managed to reach. "How beautiful, my princess," said Lena, picking up her daughter. "Shall we show it to Daddy?" They found Benjamin in the library, reviewing proposals for expanding the center. The state government had offered funding to create branches in other cities, and they were studying the best way to implement the project. "Look what Isabella brought for you," said Lena, placing the girl in her father's lap. "For me? What a special gift," said Benjamin, making a face at his daughter, who laughed delightedly. "Silly Daddy," declared Isabella, clapping her small hands. "I am silly," he agreed, kissing the girl's chubby cheek. Silly with happiness. Lena sat in the armchair next to the desk, observing husband and daughter with deep contentment. It was hard to believe that just 3 years before, she was living a completely different life, alone, and not knowing what her true purpose was. "What are you thinking about?" asked Benjamin, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life can completely change in a short time, about how sometimes the worst situations can lead to the best discoveries." "Are you referring to almost being sacrificed in a black magic ritual?" "I'm referring to finding you." Isabella, tired of being ignored, began to pull at her father's newly trimmed beard. "Daddy, play." "Want to play, do you? Then let's play," said Benjamin, standing up and running through the library with the girl in his arms, making airplane noises. Lena watched them, her heart overflowing with love. This was the life she had always dreamed of, not the safe and predictable life she led before, but a life full of meaning, purpose, and abundant love. That night, after Isabella fell asleep in her crib, Lena and Benjamin sat on the porch as they did every night, sharing the events of the day and making plans for the future. "I received an interesting call today," said Benjamin, "from a journalist from New York. He wants to do a story about the center, about how we transformed the farm." "And what did you say?" "That I needed to talk to my wife first. It would be good publicity for the project, but you're afraid they'll retell the whole story? The curse, the deaths, the rituals?" "Exactly. I don't want our family to become a media circus." Lena thought for a moment. "Maybe it's time to tell our story. Not all the supernatural details, but the essence. How love can transform legacies of violence into something positive. Would you participate in the interview?" "I would, but with one condition, that the focus be on the present and the future, not the past. That they show what we're building, not what we destroyed." "Perfect. I'll call him tomorrow." They were silent for a moment, listening to the night sounds of the farm, crickets singing, wind in the trees, the distant murmur of conversations among the women who were still awake. Benjamin, Lena said suddenly, do you think she's at peace? Who? Your mother? Yes. Do you think Emma finally managed to rest? Benjamin took her hand, playing with the gold wedding band she wore along. With her engagement ring. I think so. I think she's at peace knowing that you're happy, that the curse was broken, that Isabella will grow up free from any shadow of the past. Sometimes I feel as if she's still around, not as a ghost, but as a loving presence, especially when I'm with Isabella. Maybe she is. Maybe true love is stronger than death, more enduring than any curse. Lena nestled against him, feeling the deep peace that had become her constant companion. You know what impresses me most? She said. What? How we managed to transform a story that began with so much suffering into a story of hope. Your family caused so much pain for generations, and now we're using the Walker name to heal. It's the power of choice, replied Benjamin. Each generation can choose to repeat the mistakes of the past or create something new. And we chose to create. We chose to love. The next morning, Lena woke to the sound of Isabella babbling cheerfully in her crib. The girl had developed the habit of talking to something no one else could see, animated gestures and sounds that almost seemed like responses to a conversation. Who are you talking to, little one? Asked Lena, picking up her daughter. Isabella pointed to an empty corner of the room and said clearly, Grandma. Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. Isabella had never known either of her grandmothers. Benjamin's mother had died long before. She was born and Emma had died when Lena was a child. Grandma? Repeated Lena. Pretty Grandma, said Isabella, smiling at the empty corner. Grandma sings. For a moment, Lena could have sworn she heard the distant echo of a lullaby, the same one Emma used to sing to her when she was small. But when she paid attention, there was nothing but the wind at the windows. Shall we have breakfast with Daddy? Suggested Lena, deciding not to question the mysteries of childhood. In the communal kitchen, they found Benjamin helping prepare breakfast for all the center's residents. It was a tradition that had begun in the first months. Everyone ate together like a big family. Good morning, princesses, he said, kissing the foreheads of both. How did we sleep? Isabella had company during the night, said Lena, telling him about the conversation with Grandma. Benjamin smiled. I think your mother still checks in on her from time to make sure everything is all right. Do you believe that? I believe that love doesn't end with death, and that certain people leave such deep marks on the world, that part of them always remains. Life on the farm followed its tranquil and productive rhythm. Months turned into years. Isabella grew and became a smart and caring child who treated all the women at the center as aunts, and Lena and Benjamin established themselves as one of the most respected couples in the region. The Emma Sanders Center expanded, opening branches in 3 other cities. Hundreds of women passed through its programs, many managing to completely rebuild their lives. Some remained in the region, some went on to other cities, but all carried with them the mark of hope that the center represented. When Isabella turned 5, Lena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, it would be a boy, whom they decided to name Gabriel, the messenger angel, the one who brings good news. 2 children, said Benjamin, amazed, placing his hand on Lena's still small belly. A real family. A free family, she corrected. Free of curses, free of secrets, free to be exactly what we want to be. On the night Gabriel was born, Isabella insisted she had seen pretty Grandma in the hospital room, smiling at the newborn baby. Lena chose to believe that her mother had been present to welcome the new member of the family, the first Walker child in generations to be born under the blessing of love instead of the shadow of a curse. 10 years after her first arrival, at Benedictine Farm, Lena was on the porch watching her children play in the garden. Isabella, now 11, was teaching 6-year-old Gabriel how to care for the roses she herself had planted in honor of the grandmother she never knew. The center had become a national reference, and Lena had published a book about her experience, a carefully edited version that focused on social transformation without going into the supernatural details. The book had become a bestseller, and the income from royalties was entirely directed to expanding the support programs. Benjamin now traveled around the country, giving lectures on transforming family legacies and corporate social responsibility. He had become a respected voice in the discussion about how companies and traditional families could use their resources to generate positive impact in society. "Mum," called Isabella, running toward the porch. "Gabriel wants to know if the people who died here still visit the farm." Lena looked at her younger son, who was watching her with curious and intelligent eyes. "Why that question, Gabriel?" "Because sometimes I see a beautiful lady in the garden. She always smiles at me, but when I wave, she disappears." Lena and Benjamin exchanged glances. It was the first time Gabriel mentioned visions similar to those Isabella had when she was small. "And how do you feel when you see this lady?" asked Lena. "Happy," replied Gabriel simply, "as if she liked me." "I think she does like you," said Lena, picking up her son. "I think she loves you and your sister more than you can imagine." That night, after the children were asleep, Lena and Benjamin walked to the old chapel. The building had been completely renovated and transformed into a community library and event space. Where once there was horror and death, now there were books, lectures, weddings, and baptisms. "Do you think we've done enough?" asked Lena, observing the place where it all began. "I think we've done more than enough," replied Benjamin, embracing her. "We transformed a place of death into a place of life. We created a family based on love. We helped hundreds of people rebuild their lives. And we broke a century-old curse." We broke a century-old curse. They stood there for a few minutes, absorbing the peace that now permeated every inch of that place that was once the scene of so much suffering. "Benjamin," Lena said suddenly, "thank you." "For what?" "For choosing love. For risking everything to break the cycle. For building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for coming to find me. For being brave enough to face the truth, even knowing it could destroy you. It destroyed the old version of me and created this new version which is infinitely better." They returned home hand in hand, passing through the garden where their children played during the day, past the illuminated windows where women were rebuilding their lives, through the spaces they had created with so much love and dedication. Benedictine Farm slept in peace, protected by the love of a family that had chosen to be different, that had transformed a legacy of violence into an example of hope. And somewhere among the loving shadows of the night, Emma Sanders smiled, finally at peace, knowing that her daughter had found not just the love that she herself could never have, but a way to transform her pain into healing for hundreds of other women. The curse was broken, the cycle was ended, and a new story, a story of love, hope, and transformation, had only just begun. At Benedictine Farm, where everything began with tears, now there were only smiles, and so it would be forever.